Fontaine is great, and I'm here to talk about why I've been enjoying Fontaine since it dropped a few weeks ago. This is going to be a bit different than my usual character analysis videos, as this is mostly just going to be me listing the things I liked and more of a first impressions type of video on Fontaine. And it's also because I feel like I've complained a lot about Genshin, and it's time for me to show some appreciation for this game, because I do love this game. If I didn't love it, I wouldn't have spent so many hours of my life on it, nor will I be making videos about it. It's a game that's very near and dear to my heart. Which is why every time Hoyo does something to step up the quality of the game, it makes me giddy, and it reminds me of why I fell in love with the world of Teyvat in the first place. And Fontaine is a good example of Hoyo making the experience a lot more enjoyable with every new region. I will be focusing on characters, narrative, and story elements of Genshin rather than gameplay, and this is going to be very subjective. And I haven't finished most of the world quests at the time of recording this because I am taking my time to play through each of them. So without further ado, here are the things about Fontaine as of 4.0 that I already love. Also, spoilers for most of the Fontaine Archon quests. I'm going to be honest, at first, I'm not the biggest fan of Lyney and Lynette's design. But goddamn, the Archon quest made me love both of them so much that I actually tried pulling for them. I liked how they were one of the first people that we meet in Fontaine, and I also liked that they used both Lyney and Lynette to set up the Fontaine Archon quest. They wasted no time in showing both Lyney and Lynette's personality to the players, and I think that's what made me love both of them almost instantly. We get a glimpse of Lynette's personality through her first meeting with the Traveler, where she was mostly lost in thought and looking over the water. Lynette is reserved and thoughtful as she calmly explains to the Traveler about how a big chunk of Fontaine is just now submerged underwater, which later on is revealed to be a part of a prophecy, but more on this later. She's calm and mostly keeps to herself, and once Lyney shows up, it's obvious that Lynette usually just lets Lyney do the talking for her. Speaking of Lyney, he shows up only moments later, and we can already see that he is a lot more lively and cheeky just from the way he acts and talks to the Traveler. Lyney's cunning personality is also revealed when he essentially saved the Traveler from getting arrested by Furina. I will dive into Lyney and Lynette's personality more in a separate video, but I will say that I love the contrast that they have despite being twins, and also how Lynette's reserved personality is a direct result of her trauma, and it's just not her being reserved and quiet because she's shy. Well, obviously there's nothing wrong with that, of course. I just find it very interesting that despite being twins and having shared trauma, the twins' personality could not be more different from one another. I also like that the game spent time with the twins and made the Traveler and in turn the players form a bit of an attachment to them, even though it was still kind of short before getting into the real meat and potatoes of the first act of the Archon quest, that being Lyney's trial. I have a lot to say about Lyney's trial, but the thing about the first act of the Archon quest that really left an impression on me is how violent it was, and just how Hoyo actually follows through with a lot of the setup that they did at the beginning of the quest. Sumeru and Fontaine especially has been a massive step up in terms of writing, especially when it comes to the darker parts of the story. Now, Genshin has always had dark and disturbing lore such as Higi Village, Conria, and the Sun Children of Enkanomiya, just to name a few. But Fontaine is the first time that it's been put in the forefront. Like, sure, the Dainsleif quests are usually darker in tone, like the whole tragedy with the Hilichurls and just the fate of the Conria people in general is absolutely horrific. But I feel like because we don't really see it firsthand or happen in real time, it's not as shocking as the darker moments we get in Fontaine. We didn't get to see Conria's destruction firsthand. Maybe we'll get a flashback to that moment sometime in the future, but as of now, we only hear recounts of how Conria was destroyed through other people. But we did see a man getting crushed by a giant box in the first act of the Fontaine Archon quest. Again, I know there's a lot of disturbing scenes in Genshin, like that dead guy we found in the first Dainsleif quest, but they went kinda hard with this one. I also didn't think much of it when Charlotte mentioned there's a case of how young girls have disappeared over the years, so I was pleasantly surprised when this piece of information became very significant later on. And I was even more surprised to see how this whole mystery was resolved right before our eyes. And we also learned that Lyney and Lynette were initially taken in as foster children by aristocrats. Lynette was even sold at one point before the knave saved victim by killing the aristocrat, might I add. Linny even added a very graphic detail about how the ground was covered in blood when he got there to save his sister, and also how they later discovered several young girls in the basement of said aristocrat. We also have people literally dissolving into water. I don't know why, but I genuinely thought that they would retcon this and somehow bring the dissolved people back to life, but they never did. The victims just stayed dead at the end of the quest. These are really dark topics that's never been in the forefront of the game, specifically in the main quest, and I'm glad that Hoyo seems to be okay with having these kind of narratives in the story now. Of course, it doesn't need to be like this all the time. Like, I will take my annual Klee summer event, but it's a nice change of pace. And even after all that, we still have the whole allegory about drug abuse and the whole thing with Vacher, which I will discuss in a bit because I do have a lot to say about Navia and the second act of Fontaine. But before that, can I just say, I liked that the Traveler reacted so negatively towards Linny and Lynette when it was revealed that they were a part of the Fatui. Now, this one is a bit of a controversial one, I think. The debate whether or not the Traveler should have autonomy or any type of personality is a whole separate discussion, but for me personally, I did like that they reacted badly to Linny and Lynette hiding their association to the Fatui. Mostly because the Traveler is trying to defend Linny in court, like in a literal murder trial, so it would have been nice to know a detail this important from the start and not get blindsided by it midway. And also, I think the Fatui has caused enough trouble in Tevat, or at least in the Traveler's journey, for them to actively distrust anything related to the organization. The Traveler's experience with the Fatui was mostly pretty bad, and I know that some people seem to think that the Traveler was too nice to Child and was a lot harsher to Linny and Lynette, but I think that's fair and kind of realistic. The Traveler has met Child a number of times and has spent a lot more time with him, and even then, they don't completely trust Child. In both events where the Traveler bumps into Child, they are always wary of him. And on top of it all, Linny is just flat out lying in his own murder trial. He purposely hid the very, very important detail of why he didn't hear the vase breaking. So yeah, I can understand why the Traveler would be angry with Linny and Lynette. The one thing I really disliked about that scene though is how Paimon started calling them the bad guys. I'm personally not a big fan of how the game is still pushing the Fatui are pure evil narrative, even though we've met several other members of the Fatui who are just people, including Linny and Lynette. Granted, you could argue that's just how the Traveler and Paimon see the Fatui, but I'm just kinda tired of hearing how the Fatui is evil and bad this far into the story. And another thing I also thought was kinda weird was how the Traveler is willing to go through this much trouble after spending one afternoon with the twins, but it's a minor nitpick. Other than that, I loved almost every part of the first act, including the confrontation scene with the twins. And don't get me wrong, I was frustrated during that scene because I already loved Linny and Lynette by that point, and I personally wanted to be nicer to them, but I also understood why the Traveler was so pissed off. Another thing I loved in the Archon quest was Child. Now this is completely biased. If you didn't know, Tartaglia is actually one of my favorite characters in Genshin. So seeing him randomly appear in Fontaine and is even part of the main plot for some reason was an absolute delight. I love the Harbingers, and while I knew we were gonna see the Knave in Fontaine eventually, seeing Child there is definitely a nice bonus. I half expected his appearance would be something similar to his appearance in that one event with Yoimiya, but turns out man's part of the main plot. And the Fatui is so notorious for being an evil organization that rivals Team Rocket at this point, he just gets accused as the perpetrator of one of the most famous unsolved murder mysteries in a foreign nation. I was also very pleasantly surprised that Child even talked about his time in the Abyss, which I think is the first time ever that this is mentioned in dialogue and not hidden away in his character story. And also him just being excited to fight Chlorine, and the mystery as to why his vision just stopped working, also the way he gave up his vision the moment it stopped working. Again, him getting accused of being a serial killer for a case that's been ongoing for at least 20 years, even though Child himself is probably in his early 20s, is hilarious. But my my favorite moment of Child in Fontaine was him getting bodied by Nouvellette moments before he used his delusion. It was amazing to witness. In all seriousness, I did love that scene because it was the perfect scene to show how strong Nouvellette is. We know that Child is strong. He's a harbinger, like even though he's the youngest one and the most normal out of the bunch, he's not really someone you'd want to mess with. Because one, he's batshit crazy, and second, his specialty seems to be either combat or debt collection. And for Nouvellette to be able to one-hit KO him so easily just gets me excited to know more about Nouvellette in the upcoming acts of the Fontaine Archon quest. He is probably one of my favorites from Fontaine alongside Furina. And yes, I love Furina. And I'm going to talk about them both here since at the time of recording this video, there isn't a lot that's revealed about both of them. But I already love them both and I'm ready to give up most of my belongings to pull for them. I absolutely love how obnoxious Furina is and how useless she actually is as an Archon, at least up until this point. She randomly accuses innocent civilians and even foreigners for crimes as serious as murder without any substantial evidence despite, being the Archon of justice. And it cannot be more obvious that she's more like a mascot and the actual figure of authority in Fontaine is Nouvellette. I like how Nouvellette is exasperated every time he needs to interact with her. My personal favorite moment of the two is when Furina tried to sneakily escape from the courtroom after not only accusing an innocent civilian of murder but also bullshits her way through most of the trial, and Nouvellette is just so done with her. Their dynamic reminds me a lot of Hu Tao and Zhongli, but Furina being more of a loser in general just makes it even more hilarious in my opinion. Her personality is very different from the previous 4 Archons we've met, and I think that's a good thing. I know her obnoxious personality isn't for everyone and she's just too much to a lot of people, but I personally think she's a breath of fresh air. I feel like we need more characters who are mean and borderline hostile towards the Traveler, especially Archons. I mean, A was very hostile towards the Traveler, but Furina is more of a brat than she is a threat. The way they introduced Furina into the quest was also excellent in my opinion. I did not expect to meet Fontaine's Archon 15 minutes into the quest. Also, props to her VA, especially her English VA, because wow, what a performance. I absolutely cannot wait to learn more about these two and the prophecy, which to recap is how the people of Fontaine will all be dissolved into water and only the Hydro Archon will remain weeping on her throne. I have so many questions as to why only people from Fontaine can be dissolved into water. Like, what is this sin everyone's talking about, and why does it have to end with Furina crying alone on her throne? I also think they did a good job in building up this prophecy, and I cannot wait to see more of Furina's reaction to it, because seeing the prophecy slowly coming true must be messing with her head in one way or another. I'm not much of a theorist, but I'm very excited to find out more about this. Moving on to the second act of the Archon quest, let's talk about Navia. Now, I've complained a lot about the state of female characters in Genshin, but Navia was amazing. I loved Nahida, Dihya, and Candice in Sumeru, but Navia, Furina, Chlorine, and even Charlotte are what I consider to be great female characters. Hell, they're just great, interesting characters in general, especially Navia. I didn't really expect her to be such an important character when she first appeared, but Navia has come through so many times. Like, Lyney would have been convicted if not for Navia. But it's in the second act that we got to see her really shine as a character. I will save my full analysis for Navia when she gets released and when we know more about her, but goddamn, she was amazing in the Archon quest. I didn't expect to see so many sides of Navia in the second act of the quest, but I'm glad Hoyo took their time to show so much of her, because her drive in finding the truth about her father was truly the heart of the Archon quest. She's introduced as this boss lady who is smart and perceptive and strong, but she isn't arrogant in any way and is also shown to be vulnerable and emotional. Her confrontation with Nouvellette was definitely one of the most emotionally charged moments in the game and definitely one of my favorites. Also, the way it started raining outside right after that scene, beautiful, I tell you. It makes her feel like a real person with her own motivations, goals, regrets, and who is just doing her best to help and take care of the people around her. I also really like her interactions with Chlorine, given their history and how they were able to slowly make amends with each other at the end of the quest, showing how Navia was slowly moving past and making peace with her grief. It's very hard to not like Navia, honestly, which is why to me, Vacher getting what he deserved deserved felt so satisfying. Because this man who had the gall to not only kill innocent young women but also framed innocent people, ruining families like Navia's and so many others, deserved to go out in the most horrible way possible, which he did. Now his death really caught me off guard. We've gotten on-screen deaths before, but this one was so disturbing on so many levels, especially in a game like Genshin. Deserved, but disturbing. But I'm glad it's there. So yeah, those are the things I already love about Fontaine, and honestly, I just wanted to make this video because I wanted to talk about Fontaine because of how much I've been enjoying the story and the characters. Let me know what you think of Fontaine so far. I would love to hear your thoughts, and hopefully I can play through all of the world quests soon, and I will do deep dives on the Fontaine characters when we know more about them, which is something I'm very excited about. So yeah, thanks for watching. Subscribe if you feel like it. If not, then that's okay too. I'll see you in the next one. Bye!